Today I want to talk again about this amazing book, Color and Light by James Gurney. If you are like some of the artists that I know that have this book and never studied it or don't know where to start or how to structure your studies or even haven't heard of this book and want to develop your painting skills, your light skills and color skills, this video is for you. Instead of doing a book review as I did before here on the channel, you can find the link in the description for a 15-minute video going over major topics of the book and what's the flow. This is the material that you're seeing on your screen is what I show in that video. But today I want to really dive deeper and suggest a way you could study this book broken down into 6 major parts and all those parts also broken down into smaller steps. It was first, the initial idea for this was that the 6 part would represent 6 months and each step a week, but definitely go at your own pace. Some of the topics will take longer than a week to understand and comprehend on a perception level, and some of them will take probably a lifetime to master. Portrait painting, edges, and a lot of that stuff would take a long time. And so think of this book as going in cycles, and the last part of the book is looking back at everything and doing summarizing all the points discussed. And I want to use step 25 from our journey to really look back and go every cycle you go through. Color and light, you get better and better. So don't rush yourself. Don't put too much pressure on your first journey through all the topics. This book can also be looked at as a checklist on what's important for painting, as well as a lot of in-depth discussions on pigments, gamut mapping, palettes, and all of that stuff that we sometimes as digital painters don't look really deeply into that, and they are really important if we are looking at masters and trying to comprehend what they did so well that we can bring to our work. So without further ado, I want to jump right in. So part 1, it's all about master studies. So we're going to look back in history and really digest what those amazing painters have done. Sometimes they had a lot of problems with pigments. Technology was developing, especially after the Renaissance. Technology in painting started developing all the way to the advent of the tube painting, the tube of paint. That was really a big breakthrough that allowed artists to go out of the studio and really look at light and make things work. Instead of just doing studio work and smaller things. Landscape painting grew a lot on this era, and especially how to compose images that look cohesive in a sense of like color and light, and how to break those rules to convey and express what you want. So I would recommend doing simple studies. This exercises by by Nathan Falk, will definitely help you understand the basic value structure. Nathan on his course on schoolism goes a lot in depth on the simple statement kind of approach. So trying to understand in 3-4 values what's the overall structure of a painting. Andrew Loomis also talks about this in his book Creative Illustration. So try and do exercises of breaking your images down to their simple statement, to their core value structure. After that, you can do as Nathan asks from his students, and we can see here the work from Lauren and Sam. Do full value studies as well as full color studies. Then you start to get a little more of a grasp on how they organize everything and how they use different colors that they have, different palettes that they have to really convey what they want to say in what they are observing and admiring sometimes in nature. About the old masters, so step 1, I would highly recommend looking at the artists that were starting to perceive light in a different way. So all the way back to Caravaggio in the late Renaissance, as well as the 17th century painters, Velázquez, Vermeer, and Rembrandt, because they really went deep into understanding light, chiaroscuro, how to convey the sense of a working light throughout your compositions. So that will be an amazing start. If you want to go back in time and understand what Raphael or Michelangelo were doing, it's also informative and interesting. But I think for the ends that we are looking at for plein air painting or doing representative illustration and all of that, those masters will be really big. Academic painters, this image is in the book as well from Jerome. Also a great look into how to combine models in different lighting settings into a complex scene. Doing like historical painting was really big in this era. And sometimes if you look carefully at a painting like this from Jerome, as he was painting models in different lighting conditions and in the studio and adding them to the final complex painting, sometimes it can look like a little bit of a copy and paste here and there, and the lighting situation is not cohesive. So it's interesting to have a look at that and understand that at this moment, late 19th century, they were starting to go outside and really look at the world again, as some of these painters from the 17th century did. So they were starting to really have a grasp on what cohesive color looked like. So other names would be Sargent going out as well and doing a lot of plein air watercolor studies on top of his portrait work, as well as Zorn, that was definitely going outside, and it will come back later on when we talk about palettes and limited palettes and all. On the open air movement, this is a big one. This is also a big one nowadays. So I'll talk about some materials that we could use as complementary knowledge for you all to really go out and start experiencing the world in a more broad sense. And we have here from the book Stanhope, as well as Bierstadt. There is one painting in the book that from James Gurney that looks a lot with this color palette and this kind of gradation on the sky and all. So it's really interesting to see the influence that the Hudson River School had on modern painters, as well as the Russian school. Ivan Shishkin is a big one, definitely to take a look. As I said, some of the materials that I would love for you all to start looking at and going into traditional painting to have a grasp of all the concepts that we're going to be talking about later. So James Gurney has some Gumroad tutorials on watercolor outside and painting in gouache and a lot of different topics. It's great material, as well as Nathan Fawkes has a book on the topic and a course on schoolism. Finally, last but not least on this topic, Alla Prima, I did a review on the book here on the channel, is a great resource for those that want to go outside and paint. Richard recently passed away, but he has a lot of tutorials and DVDs that you can look at him doing his work and learn a lot from that. Last but not least, symbolists and illustrators. This is a big moment where artists started breaking some of the rules and really using color, especially, as well as light, to convey the emotions that they wanted to convey. So Mucha in his series of paintings for the Slav epic, as well as Maxfield Parrish, one of the Golden Age illustrators in the US, that used a lot of saturation values, as well as like simplifying the rendering to really convey a very expressive image, and contrasting colors as well, like more warm colors and cool colors clashing for your attention, but in a balanced way. So that's basically part one. So do master studies as well as start going outside. It's not to look for topics. We're going to be talking about this on part 2 mostly, but start understanding pigments and getting used to that. There is an amazing course on watercolor on Schoolism by Gonzalo Carcamo to really start gaining a grasp, as well as digital painting. If you are not very familiar with that, start learning the tools. So looking back in history and tools. So let's jump into part 2. Part 2 is all about sources of light and the form, principles of form. So now it's time to go outside, both if you're painting traditionally or digitally. You have great materials out there. For example, Dais Tsutsumi's and Robert Kondo's course on the Schoolism on painting with light and color is a great way to have a step-by-step guide going outside and looking at a lot of the topics that James Gurney is discussing here. We can look at the contents from the book here, and he really goes into almost a checklist like a way of experiencing the world and what sources of light do we have. So natural lighting, I added here Sorolla, one of my biggest inspirations in the use of light, especially the paintings at the beach with the boats and everything. That's great. Overcast light, so Zorn once again and Winslow Homer are great examples of the use of overcast. Window light, I want to emphasize these 2 examples. Fernando, great artist, he also uses like artificial light here that we're going to get back to in a minute, but a lot of window light coming in, as well as Stanley Kubrick, Barry Lyndon. So that's a point to stop right here and talk about references. I'm both bringing references from movies as well as paintings and illustrators from different eras. So really trying to understand how they look at the world and translate that to their paintings or their entertainment things. It could be games, for example. The Last of Us series, I did a video on why that's so beautiful. There are lots of uses on that, as well as animation and live action movies and paintings from amazing artists. So definitely look at the world and look at what people are doing with all that information and translating that to the canvas or the digital canvas. Here, once more, window light from Dais Tsutsumi, a very intimate scene of a living room with that amazing gradation of light. So very, very, very nice. Artificial light, we can look at candle lights. They are natural, but artificial in some sense. Barry Lyndon is once again a great example to use that. Flashlights and different lighting directions. We're going to take a look at that later on. And street lights, both those that are warm lights and those that are cool lights. Understanding the differences, the fall off different light sources and all of that is very big. Another great resource is the course on Schoolism by Sam Newson. We're going to talk about Sam Newson in a bit, but it's great on understanding different sources of light as well and painting with them. He's going to appear throughout the video. And last but not least, bioluminescence or different types of lights that are not the traditional that we're seeing, as in this example from Avatar by Dylan Cole. I also did a video on Avatar here on the channel. Next step, we're gonna jump into form. And for that, I think one of the biggest references that I have is Scott Robertson's book, How to Render. I think that will give a lot of exercises for you all to make and really understand this concept, this amazing concept that form change equals value change, or the other way around, value change equals form change. So if you have one simple value and you start breaking down different planes that they will have different values, you will add volume to the scene. So understanding that and how light falls on a sphere, James Gurney goes through a lot of that in the book, and I have here one example from Destiny by Jamie Jones and Dorje Belbrook. Doesn't matter the size of the sphere. This is like very big, but the cast shadows and core shadows and Terminator concepts, everything will be in there. Another big topic, we're going to look at that in a minute very deeply, because it's something that really impacted me throughout my journey, is value relativity. So sometimes lights in the dark sides of the shadow sides of objects will be closer to the darks in the light side. So having that balance is very, very subtle and interesting. There is a topic on this by Andrew Loomis on creative illustration, also a big reference on how to use textures in the light versus the shadows, how to maintain this separation between the shadows and never have the light part of the shadows go across the line into the dark sides of the light, so that you have a very big separation. That's a very in-depth topic that would be interesting for you all to go deeper, both with James Gurney's book as well as Scott Robertson's and so on and so forth. And finally, on this topic, different lighting directions and situations will convey different moods and messages. So we have here like horror movies use underlighting as well as backlights and rim lights to really emphasize story. Citizen Kane, another big usage of this, and silhouetting. The noir movement is really big on using the contrast between light and darks to really convey the message. Another big topic on me that when I started observing that, and James Gurney brings that really well here in the book, is reflected light. So this example by Edwin Lord Weeks, as well as the one from Dice Tsutsumi, are really big. Last but not least on this topic, clouds and other formations that break a little bit of the form principle, and will have a lot of transmitted light and different situations. This is an example where it almost looks a little plastic, so it's following a lot the form, but that's by design. That's what Sam Nilsson wanted to convey. That's a little out of the natural, so it's the limits where you can make some adjustments to get the impression that you want. So just going back really quickly on the big topics for me from this part, reflected light, a big one. Once I started understanding that under planes, the planes that are facing down, will have a lot of reflected light on them. That could be on the figure, that could be on architecture, in a lot of places. Things started really getting together, and my perception really jumped, as well as what we said before of the relativity of values. So if we do get the values together, we see that that's the same value. So the light and the dark, depending if they are on the light side or the shadow side of the object, they are going to have potentially the same value. And understanding that and controlling that will be big for your painting skills going forward. Part 3, it's all about the concepts of color and pigments. So we're going to look at the relationship between values and colors and chroma. So some situations where the light will go so intense that it will get closer to white. This is almost like a photograph kind of situation where you are exposing for the shadows instead of for the lights. And we can find that on real life on very specific situations where it's pretty hot. Like if you look at a rocket, fire, and all of that, it will get closer to that. But definitely on cameras and paintings, to convey that sense, we'll need to control a lot of the values. One big topic here is local color. A lot of people that learned to paint back when they were children tend to think of painting almost on a paint by numbers kind of way, painting as local colors. So the tree trunk is brown, the tree leaves are green, and all of that ideas, and there is no light interaction with that. So when you start understanding that you can separate both, you paint with local colors, flat local colors, and then you do your rendering. That's more of a digital approach. You do your rendering with different lighting situations. You can also, as we saw on part 2, this house over here, Dice Tsutsumi does a lot of different lighting situations, just using local colors as a basis and a pass of lighting on top with digital painting. So you can also do that. A little bit of what we can see here again from Dice, doing very local color understanding and some beams of light here and there. Really conveying the mood that he wanted. A little bit of this rim light and all of that, but a very local color in a way. Some color cases, so different color situations. So the green problem, so painting leaves green or using pure green from the tube versus mixing yellows and blues and getting to a more natural green. That's a big discussion all over painting, and a great intro here by James Gurney, another use of Ivan Shishkin as a great example. Gradations, he talks about different color situations, like Bierstadt, as we said before, and Dice Tsutsumi here with a lot of tinting of the local colors with the light sources that are very big, or atmospheric perspective in this case. And we're going to get back to sky and atmospheric effects down the line on the book as well. The second part, chapter 5, and I put like steps 11 and 12 here, talks about pigment. So understanding that different colors will have a different place in the color wheel, direct from the tube and all the mixtures that you can make. So looking at some of the palettes that we have here from Nicolas Uribe, Nathan Fawkes, and James Gurney himself, you can see a lot of variation from what those artists use, but you will get to almost the same approach. And I've shared Richard Schmidt's palette on my book on Alla Prima. One big part of my review on Alla Prima is talking about doing this kind of palette studies. What's the range you can achieve with your values, with your colors, with the colors that you have in the tube, combining them. Where can you get and what type of results can you get? So that's a big one on controlling your pigments. Different from digital painting that we have the whole range of colors. When you're painting traditionally, you have a limited palette. Even if you have a lot of different colors, you still have a limited palette. So understanding that and how to control that will go a long way on your painting skills and having a more cohesive look throughout the whole painting, not a lot of colors here and there in different situations that don't mix together. On that mixing together kind of approach, underpainting, warm underpaintings, also a topic to convey, especially vibrance in your paintings. a lot of examples by Richard Schmidt and Nathan Fawkes here to illustrate the point. A lot of artists use this kind of approach, as well as finally, last but not least, limited palettes, and definitely Zorn is one of the biggest names that come to the discussion when you talk about limited palette. That some people say that for most his paintings he used white, black, and some kind of yellow and some kind of reddish colors, and all of that combined, he can have a little bit of the bluish tones that come from the desaturated and lightened black. If you add white to black, some blacks will tend to go more in the direction of the blues. So that's an interesting discussion here, a very deep discussion that will. It's some of those that I said before that will take a long time, a lifetime to master. So just looking back at some things that really impacted me on my journey. So understanding the power of using local colors in painting. This palette situation is something pretty recently, and this is a great example that Richard uses on his book, that he almost talks like, let's look at the palettes as flowers. And if we do stylize this to a more pixelated approach, we can definitely see the application of these concepts in a final painting. Understanding where to put those colors and how to organize the readability will go a long way into simplifying and giving strength to your painting. As well as underpainting, another great topic that I didn't use, especially being more of a digital painter. You can definitely bring that from the traditional painting to your skills. Jumping to part 4, now we're going to talk about the relationship between color and the relationship between color and human beings. So the way we perceive the world and how it affects us in a almost like a psychology of colors, as well as some very in-depth topics like edges and how that conveys depth and organizes paintings as well. So some examples here, Edmund Dulac and Zorn in a very monochromatic scheme. The relationship between complementary colors like warm and cool especially will go a long way into creating contrast and readability. We can see the same here with Mike as well as Eitan Zana. Eitan Zana is more on a color accent kind of approach, so a more desaturated background, a more desaturated overall scene, and a color accent in some of the spots to really convey this amazing sense of warmth in there. So definitely take a look at a lot of paintings. Mead Schaefer here, color accents to guide the eye as well. You have a little bit of an accent here, as well as a more triad kind of approach to your palette. And Nathan Fawkes here, color accents as well, warm versus cool, desaturated colors and giving this big mood. We'll go back to talking about sunsets later on. I love this kind of more warm approach just on the edge of the lighting situation of your painting. Gamut mapping is a big topic that James Gurney brings. I love these examples. I talked about this on the book review. Using a limited palette, you can convey so much and have a lot of strength. So both the book and some tutorials from Foundation Patron, for example, will go deep into this topic. And the next one is a big one that I don't have a grasp on. It's more on the psychology of colors, but there are amazing people out there that talk about color scripting, such as Dice Tsutsumi in his course on schoolism. We can also see applications here for The Incredibles in understanding that each part of the movie, they emphasize the relationship and the effects on the viewer with color and contrasts. As well as in games, here Uncharted 4 by John Sweeney. So a lot of different topics in this part, but all talking about the relationship that we have with colors and how to control our palettes and all for our desired results. So moonlight color is moonlight blue and all of that, as well as going into edges and depth. That's definitely a big topic to go into with Alla Prima. There are other great books on oil painting by Harold Speed and Solomon J. Solomon. A lot of great stuff if you want to dive deeper into these topics. Color relationships, as well as we said, of relativity of values. We also have relativity of colors. We're going to see this example here bigger in a second. But the use of that and having a balanced color approach, it's really can get really interesting and beautiful results. And the last topic he touches on is the psychology of colors in terms of generating emotions. So McDonald's using yellows and reds to make us hungry. It's a little bit of this kind of situation. And remember some stuff like French fries and ketchup and all of that. What kind of and this is a big topic. So what kind of aesthetic preconceived ideas we have about the world, or we have been fed through mass entertainment and all of that, and now and advertising especially, and now we take that even in an unconscious level as something that is true. So that's a big one to really study and grow on. So big topics here that blew my mind when I was studying. So the contrast between complementary colors as well as warm and cool. In this case, reds and greens with this little bit of a tint of blue here. Really interesting, as well as here a little bit, desaturation versus saturation. So creating contrast through the use of light. Color relativity is a big one, so we can do the same as we did before and really bring that. I want to remind you all that I'm using the same color, and if I get closer to the more cool palette here, it gets warmer, and if I paint over the warm, it gets cooler. So it's interesting to see the kind of effect, and I'm putting here out of context. It's the same color, but in the context, it changes. It's beautiful to see how our mind goes on this kind of a topic. And last but not least, understanding the edges, understanding that you can have lost edges in a painting and connect big groupings of values and colors. That's amazing. The hair losing itself on the couch here, as well as the dress and the rest of the couch. It's an amazing situation. You don't have to see all the edges to really convey what the painting needs to look like. And now part 5, we get to what we normally talk about when talk about rendering. That's why parts 1 to 4 are so important before we get here and are in the beginning of the book. For us to think about all those topics and the relationship with pigments and how colors affect us and all of that before we start even understanding rendering for metals and highlights and all of that. So I've divided into 3 steps: materials 1 and 2 and skies, but it's all about basically rendering materials. So I'm gonna just change the order here a little bit because I want to talk first about photos versus observation, especially on colors and materials and all of that. Definitely looking at the world will have a very big impact. And when we get to skylight and color, that will be big. A lot of the artists, like I showed, and we have here one of his paintings, Aidan Zana, they go out even photographing and trying to color correct what they are seeing, because what we get on the camera is completely different normally from what we see in reality. So painting from life will go a long way into really helping you convey that feeling on painting. And that's the beauty of painting as well. You can really convey whatever you want, like we saw here on James Gurney. And we'll see bigger in a second. So transmitted light, so the leaves here with a lot of transmitted light, subsurface scattering, a big topic as well for us to understand. Transmitted light here as well in Lisa Skeen work for Tangled. There is a video on YouTube on subsurface scattering by Sam Newson. This is the example from the book as well. Really good for transmitted light and how the greens will get really bright on the underside, the shadow side of leaves that are being hit by direct lighting. Color regions of the face, color zones of the face. So here, both in Soroya and both men and women, we can see a little bit of that. Of course, the beard will have a very big impact on using desaturated colors for that. Effects from water, such as caustics, and going into the more specific rendering of highlights, specular reflections, and all of that we're going to see in a lot of different materials. I love this series by Jonathan Hardesty, where he painted 500 different materials. So trying to convey each one. He has a course on materials on schoolism as well. So a very good resource. And Scott Robertson's How to Render, I think, is the best book out there on rendering metal surfaces. So definitely check that out. And we can go realistic on that. Also, Dongjun Liu has great tutorials on the topic of rendering. And it's what I was going to say here. If we can go all the way realistic, such as Gonzalo Carcamo does here on watercolor, conveying realism through a little bit of abstraction as well, but more on a realistic approach. Or we can do more stylized cartoony rendering, sometimes even going more into stylized or all the way into cartoony, like we can see here, stylized by Suke, and a little bit of stylization, cartoony style by Mike here as well, on this beautiful rendering of a lot of chaos and different materials and a lot of that, and balancing that out with light, shadows, colors, and materials. So this is understanding all these topics at its best for this kind of stylized approach. And also on this part, I've added the beginning of chapter 10 that talks about atmospheric effects. So atmospheric perspective, here we can see Craig Mullins, the blue of the sky on this painting by Sid Mead, as well as some of the changes that will happen. And he talks even a little bit on here on the surface, color corona, but also sunsets will be very bright in terms of colors, and as well as if we look at, we can at this point look more directly into the sun, so we'll have that bloom of value as we talked about before. And finally, more of the golden hour, dusk, and all of that. This painting is one of my favorite paintings of all time, and Sargent painted it during 2 summers, where he had windows of 3 to 10 minutes tops painting, because it was the exact moment that he wanted to convey the lighting that he wanted to convey. So he had all materials prepared for that moment, and every day he came back, posed the models, and put all of that together. I really want to make a video especially on this painting later on. So just a quick recap on things that I've learned using photos versus observation. This is a really good video as well from James Gurney. I'll add to the description below, as well as transmitted light and subsurface scattering. When I started rendering materials, and I talk a little bit about that on my video on drawing objects and furniture. We can learn a lot from that and how to simplify some of the renderings and materials. But these like blew my mind, how we can convey with so little. We can convey gold and a lot of different materials. Dong Junlu has a painting with a sword and a shield that I didn't add here, but is a great example of amazing use of that. Atmospheric perspective is a big one and can be used, like we saw in Albert Bierstadt, really well as here Craig Mullins doing his best conveying that. And sunset colors, as I said on the other painting by Nathan Fawkes, the kind of reddish light that we have in some of, and almost like purple-like colors that will come in at this time of the day. At the other example, I talked about the edge between light and shadow. Here is more of a backlight, but we have a lot of different lights from the sky adding to the overall composition, and that's beautiful and beautifully painted by James Gurney himself on this one. So last but not least, the final step is continuing to talk about atmospheric effects, as well as going into more specific water and looking at light of day and really conveying that. So first of all, fog. I love those paintings by Monet, Giuseppe here. A lot of them recently have been discovered as that all of this is not a stylistic decision, but it's the Industrial Revolution kicking in. So a lot of smoke was all over the place, so that's why they had this kind of and we can even see a lot of this in Turner's work as well. Fog here in this beautiful example by Eitan Zana as well, a little bit of fog, especially down there closer to the waterfalls where they are falling. A lot of different effects of light, and this is where the checklist is really good as well. If you are doing a painting, looking at this, both the direction of light, this is also true here on Eitan Zana. We have a half light situation where half of the subject matter is in light and half is in shadow. This is one page from the book as well. So it's also a checklist on what kind of compositions you can do for your illustration. So dapple light situations, such as in Van Kovacs here, as well as Shishkin has a lot of dappled light in the trees themselves. And here by Saf Engstrom, openings on forests, cloud shadows. So if you're doing big vistas of big cities or medieval cities and all, you can add shadows from the clouds that will add a lot of different feelings to your painting. Even like a shadowed foreground or illuminated foreground, you can make the decision of which one will convey best. So very interesting. Reflections on the water. So a lot of different ways of conveying that, as well as the rocks. How much is see-through? How much is reflection when you're looking? It depends on the angle that you're looking at and refraction of the water. So it's interesting to see how many different artists convey this. I love the subtle color of the light going through the waves here and having this more of greenish. We can see that also here and on Dylan Cole's painting for Avatar. Ryan Lang, another big name. We saw his work previously as well. And John Singer Sargent, another great example of an artist that really understands and conveys water. Underwater paintings are really hard, so definitely worth checking out other artists that did that, as well as we said before, caustics and water effects, how they will change. We even saw one example here by Stanley Meltzoff of caustics as well. I almost skipped that, but is a great way to convey that also in underwater situations. Finally, what James calls serial painting, step 24. We have two examples by Claude Monet. He painted a lot of different lighting situations on the same topic. So we can see both on Rouen Cathedral in France, as well as this tent near his home in Giverny, near Paris as well. And Nathan Falks doing a serial painting situation, same place, different lighting times, different times of day in LA. So a great way to transmit that as well. And last but not least, getting back to all the way to the start, what we discussed before. So at the end of the day, he summarizes everything that we've seen, but I want to use this as to emphasize that learning color and light goes in cycles. So go through the book, leave it, practice, apply what you've learned in your skills, in your illustrations, test pigments, go outside, paint from life, and then get back to the book. Remember some of the points on the checklist that we talked about. If you're starting a new one, and I almost forgot Snow here by Richard Schmidt, also amazing one. Sorry to go back and forth, but I couldn't miss Schmidt painting that is so great. So and that's on also adding to the topic of going back and looking and going back and forth and getting some of the topics and going back to them. So, I want to study more snow right now, or water streams, mountain streams, and understanding what he has to bring to the table here and what other artists did will go a long way in helping you get there. So, just some final thoughts on this part. Reflections, I really blew my mind when I started using reflections, both from wet surfaces here in Zbukvich's watercolor, as well as water that is stopped, that doesn't move. So lakes and all of that are easy to see, a lot of very clear reflections. Foam, as well as transmitted light through water in the sea. So probably if you look at this and try to paint this, you'll never go to the beach again and not look at this and try to really break that down, what's happening, and even just look at the beauty of it. I talk about this on my video about finding beauty on the ordinary. I think this is a great example, just looking at small waves and how they break, how the foam does a lot of different shapes and all of that. It can get a lot philosophical really fast. Water streams, as I said before, by Sargent, and underwater painting here by Dylan Cole. So that's basically it. I really hope you enjoyed. Don't forget also to follow James Gurney's channel. He applies all that we have talked about in his work as well. So this will be a lot of great examples and discussions on all the topics on the book. So it's a great way also to go back and forth and understand each of the topics and have more examples to paint from. So I hope this inspired all of you to really go painting, really go understanding the world and admiring the beauty out there through your work, conveying what you learn, what you see, what you feel, and what you want to express. And I hope it also inspires you to go through the amazing content of this great book, Color and Light. So if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and like the video. It really helps the channel grow. It really helps James Gurney get to more people, more up and coming artists that are really studying or don't know how to study this amazing book and have that on their shelves for years, and potentially they can get back to that and really start exploring the world. So that's it from me, and I'll definitely see you all in the next video.